him or herself. But not only do you tailor to this person, but you often in psychotherapy, you make concessions to the person. So you shift or change the technique according to the person. Okay? And this is something I repeat that you may find in some living masters, the way that they teach, but it's not at all completely clear in the Buddhist texts. This is more characteristic of psychotherapy, especially psychotherapy in the last 40 years. I mean, Freud would do that. I mean, today, if Freud were living today, he would be taken before the board and he would lose his license because he did incredible things that we are taught never to do with our patients. And he would go, well, I'm Freud. And again, there's a lot to learn from Freud. Okay, so be careful with a joke. Don't take it to be a severe criticism. It's just to make it light. Okay, so we have then these basic techniques within psychotherapy which somehow make use of elements of Buddhism. And the element they make use of is what is normally called mindfulness. The problem is, some of you may have thought about this already, that the word in Sanskrit is smriti, in Pali it's sati, and it does not mean mindfulness. In fact, we don't have a word for it. Smriti is smriti, okay? And I'll say more about it in a second. Mindfulness is a loaded word in English, very much like the German equivalents, which don't mean mindfulness, by the way. Achtsamkeit, right? Aufmerksamkeit. Those other two prefer. I heard someone recently use Beziehung as a possible translation. That's not smriti. I mean, they're nice words, but are they nice? They sound beautiful, but that's not smriti. Smriti is essentially, etymology says it, is an act of memory, but not in our sense of memory, although it can have that sense. For us, usually memory means I have some kind of narrative somewhere in my brain, and I recover it, and that's memory for us. But the concept of memory was broader at that time. Nothing strange in the Middle Ages in Europe also. The concept was broader. It was a different way of looking at memory. The Spanish mystics, for instance, talk about recordar or acordar, which means to remember, and what they really means bring to mind. Needless to say, when the Spanish mystics say that, they don't mean bring to mind your breath, they mean bring to mind God Almighty, right? Very important, because a big confusion that some of the psychologists have is also Buddhists, like all the great mystics in the history of the world, have used techniques like these before. Well, they haven't, okay? It's confusion about techniques. So, to go back to smriti, in terms of usage, and this is more my interpretation, has in the Buddhist texts, I think, three possible usages that are interrelated but not completely synonymous. The first one is, and it's the order in which I present them has nothing to do with what is primary, secondary, older. I really don't know what is older. Although I do suspect that number one is older, but that's beside the point. Number one is even-minded observation. Okay. And that's probably a more general term. Notice that in some ways it is not shamatha, it's not vipassana. In fact, it sort of straddles shamatha and vipassana. For those of you who know the terms, serenity and it's observation. Serenity and observation. It straddles both. In fact, if you practice anapanasati, that is the observation of your breathing, you can actually reach a state of deep concentration that is serene, and yet it's active. The mind is active in some way. It's not quite, it's like a marriage of shamatha and vipassana. And I suspect I have no evidence for this. It's a suspicion when you read the text many times, you say, probably that smriti was among the oldest techniques or practices of Buddhism, and probably existed independent of notions of shamatha and vipassana. And this usage is seen clearly in anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, when it occurs by itself. heard longer texts, and then there are elaborations of what smriti means, then you get into smriti number 2. And smriti number 2 is when you apply this even-minded observation to specific topics that are somehow prescribed. And if you look at the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which is one of many suttas dealing with this topic, you can see how you go from mindfulness of breathing, which is very close to what psychologists call mindfulness, which is observing without judging. When you go from that to other kinds of smriti, then what you bring to mind is in some ways prescribed. Okay? Very important. I will not make any judgment whether it's good or bad. I have my personal preferences, but I don't want to bring them into this. The point is that's very important when you talk about meditation, not only in India, but in the West. Okay? The mystics in the West were not sitting and observing their breathing and somehow observing things as they are and flowing with the universe. No, they have a prescribed set of things they have to follow. Okay? That's the way it used to be, whether we like it or not. This is so important that when Buddhists came up with the idea of actually not following a particular object, other Buddhists got very upset. It's sad but important, which I must quote because it is historically so important. And the so-called Council of Lhasa, which was neither a council nor was it a Lhasa, but we are used to that in the history of India. It was a series of debates in Sunday, not Lhasa proper. In those debates, the Indian master, Shiva, was visibly upset. He used strong words. And when he heard that the Chinese master was saying, you should simply observe your mind without judgment and not fixing your mind on anything. And Shiva, the Indian master, very erudite Indian master, said, that's not Buddhism, that's madness. That's being an idiot, is the word he uses, right? That's being an idiot. And he says, in order to practice meditation, you need to know what the topic is. And that's the most common way. And that's what I quote smriti too, when you actually have a topic which you will apply this even-minded observation. And the third one, which I suspect most people haven't thought about it, but it is found in a text that Michael invoked, the Bodhicharyavatara, is when smriti is, and I know this is going to make some people very nervous, especially if you grew up in the Catholic Church, when smriti is examination of conscience. Okay. In other words, you look at what you're thinking, you look at what you're doing, and you say, is that good or is that bad? And that is found even in the Pali text, but it is found in a very dramatic and very clear way in the Bodhicharyavatara, where he will actually, as often is the case with the author of the Bodhicharyavatara, he will speak in an extremely moralistic tone about it, right? It's bad, it's not good. In fact, he says, if I see that I am motivated by ambition, then I should remain like a log. So essentially, just suppress it and stop somehow the mind. Needless to say, that's not what psychotherapy does at all. Okay? But it is a kind of smriti, and he calls it smriti. That's why I take the liberty of calling it smriti, because he calls it smriti. Okay? Apart from that, we should note that there are, of course, many different kinds of states of concentration and contemplation. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that. And those are extremely important within the Buddhist tradition. But there are also many kinds of concentration or attention or serene observation that modern psychology has discovered, some of which I find very beautiful. Anything that has to do with developmental psychology and children, I like, because children, don't take it wrong, children are not innocent, they're very selfish, very narcissistic. They're cute in their narcissism, and that's what I like. But the point is, children, for instance, have a kind of attention that's called lantern attention. And that's not anywhere in traditional meditation, although I suspect it is probably a fruit of meditation if you practice mindfulness or breathing, for instance. Lantern attention is when you're able actually open yourself into a screen rather than fixing yourself when you want now. Right? And children can do that when they're playing, for instance. Right? Not when they're in the storeroom, because then it's mommy, and then that's the narcissism coming out. Okay? So that's one example. There are others that psychologists talk about. Okay, so then the problem we have is that we have two complex systems, which the way I describe it on purpose in terms of divergence, right? It's very difficult to imagine how they could speak to each other, and that might be the problem, why they don't speak to each other. I must confess that living in Mexico and teaching my students how to meditate and seeing my patients, I had no idea that meditators and psychologists in Europe were at war, okay? And when I came here, I realized that there was quite a tense relationship between the two groups, kind of suspicion and so forth. But it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me because, as I said before, whenever we claim to be meditators or psychotherapists, we're also claiming kind of authority. Okay. And this is something that Adam Phillips is a very bright British psychoanalyst. For a long time, he was l'enfant terrible of psychoanalysis in Britain. And he has a very good book called Equals, and he has an essay in that book, first essay, in which he talks about the inequality that is built into psychotherapy. And then he compares that inequality between therapist and patient to the inequality between priest and believer, yes, between lawyer and client, and between politician and people. So, therefore, anytime you say I'm a psychotherapist, or I'm a meditator, which is an indirect way of saying I'm a priest, yeah, I am making an authority claim. Therefore, if I make an authority claim as a therapist, and I say, when people are sad, I know what to do. And then somebody else makes a claim as a meditator and says, when people are sad, I know what to do. Evidently, we're competing for the same clients, yes? And it's obvious what will happen. In fact, I would say many of the conflicts between religion and science have been of that nature. Right? You're competing for truth. And truth, of course, gives power in many ways. However, the relationship is not always tense. Many people, religious people, and some of them psychotherapists, see that there is some kind of connection. And that's what makes the problem even more interesting. If you have two sides that are completely at war, no agreement, it would not be as interesting. You actually have people who are sort of trying to bridge the difference. And that's what I'm interested in. How can you bridge it? Okay. Needless to say, anytime you communicate, you have to make concessions. Otherwise, you don't have communication. Right? So that's part of the problem. What kind of concessions can be made? Recently, walking through downtown Hamburg, I spent some time in one of my favorite places. You're not going to guess what it is. It's the Hauptkirche St. Petri. I'd like to go there. It's very beautiful and very inspirational. I was there for an organ concert just recently. On the north side of the church, there's a huge banner that invites passerbys to a variety of services that the church provides. And one of them invites us to make use of the church's Beratungs- und Seelsorgezentrum. Yes? Now notice, Beratung, Seelsorge. Right? And it doesn't say oder, it says und, right? Okay. I thought the phrase was significant. It tells us something about the possibility of a meeting point between healer and priest, which, as I said before, is very old, it's nothing new. And I could give you some anecdotes if we had time, going back to the Middle Ages. A quick search in the church's webpage also reveals something interesting. There we find the heading with hyphens between the words, Beratung, Seelsorge, Therapie. Okay? So evidently they are quasi-synonymous, right?